Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live. Happy day to you. Today we are answering the question, can you live big without the big burnout? Hmm. Over the past couple of weeks, I've spoken with multiple in-person conferences. Yes, in-person conferences. Woohoo! And the feedback has been very strong that people are just frankly tired. Okay. People are tired. Thanks to over 2 years actually, of living in constant compounding change and uncertainty, people are massively stressed. And over half the people I've spoken with in just the past 2 weeks, for example, have expressed a concern about burnout, exhaustion, etc. Now, everyone I've met, by the way, has shared their desire for peace and finding balance again. That has been a big topic overall for every single person that I've spoken with. So, if you're interested in finding your balance and achieving your goals without sacrificing your well being, come on in, join us for a great conversation. Career Coffee Chat is here to be a conversation that's a catalyst for change. So, don't be shy, say hi, share your name and where you're from because I want to welcome you to the show. And speaking of Career Coffee Chat, we have the live stream and a podcast, and podcast is available on all major channels. So if you want to be sure not to miss any shows or be able to watch the replay easy, then just hop on over to our YouTube channel and be sure to subscribe. And if you've never seen my smiling face before, I'm your host, Erin Urban. I'm a certified executive leadership coach. I help people in the workplace find well-being and happiness, basically, and thrive in their zone of genius. I should be fancier, some sort of branding statement, but that's truth. I help people find happiness and live their best work in their life. But speaking of work and life, the paradigm is shifting. So what worked to achieve goals 2+ years ago really not necessarily the way to yield the same results today. My guest today, Lisa, will share with you how you can effectively position yourself to thrive through change. You don't have to fake it till you make it. We will share what really works for you to seek success both personally and professionally. So, living big without the big burnout. Now, more about Lisa. She is an executive life and leadership coach. She's a master certified coach, by the way, to big hearted, high achievers who crave extraordinary lives. Yeah, and impact without the exhaustion. As an elite coach, she brings deep insights, practical tactics, and masterful partnerships to enact transformative life and business changes. She's also an ICF Mentor Coach, speaker, and author of Success in Any Season, and a founder of LP Coaching and Consulting. So I want to give a big, warm welcome to Lisa. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. And
Yay!
I assume that you're also good after 2 weeks of in-person conferences. You didn't tell me that. That's amazing.
Yes, yes, it was so much fun. I'm not kidding you. It was so much fun. I think people are
Mm,
ready. They're ready. They're craving that in-person contact. So as those of
I
you
agree.
out there are tuning into the live show, as you hop onto the live show, don't be shy. Say hi. Say where you're from. I want to welcome you to the show and let me know, if you're kind of ready. Now, I've heard, different perspectives on this. To be fair, there are a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't know, this COVID thing isn't done yet. There's a lot of fear around that. I get it.
Mhm.
I totally get it because I recently had the recent strain and I don't recommend it. It's not a great weight loss program and it's not much fun. But it did give me the antibodies to go to a conference in confidence, if you will. So it was wonderful because one of the conferences I was at had over 1,000 people and the other one had almost 600 people. So, or sorry, it's almost 700 people. So it was fantastic just to see people again and just chat in person because there's an
Mhm.
energy there that cannot be replaced necessarily by virtual environments. So
I completely agree. And if you're still feeling a little edgy around in-person events, there's tons of virtual events out there.
mhm,
Lots and lots of conferences. And I think that that's going to be a large part of what we see in the future for
yeah,
entrepreneurship, for getting
mhm,
together, is there's going to be a lot of hybrid conversations, a lot of hybrid situations, and we'll have options instead of in person or nothing. So
Right,
I'm
exactly. There'll
grateful
be a
for
lot
that.
more options. And what's interesting, before 2020, that wasn't even really something. I mean, people were
Right.
talking about it, but they weren't really serious. They were
Mhm,
still doing the in-person event, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for some
mhm,
people, let's just say more practically, they have to drive hours and hours and hours. Um, and it also, I feel like, shackles people who don't necessarily want to embrace the urban living environment, kind
mhm,
of shackles them to that way of living. And maybe that's
mhm,
not how they want to raise their kids or have their families. And the new way of being, I call myself a little bit of a futurist, workplace and life, to be honest, futurist. It's just a very different, a very freeing. It's almost like we have more freedom now than
mm,
ever.
mhm. More opportunities, more options.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I think what you said was really important, that people are craving more interaction.
Yes.
And I always go back to this quote that loneliness is actually the number one cause of burnout. HBR did a big
Yes.
study, I want to say back in 2013, on workplace burnout, and they found actually that the number one cause for it is disconnection.
Hmm.
Loneliness, isolation, not being connected to other people, not being connected to meaningful work, just being
Yeah.
isolated and in a silo. So of
Absolutely.
course people are feeling burned out from the pandemic because there's layers upon layers of
Burnout.
isolation and disconnect,
Yes. Absolutely.
especially for entrepreneurs,
Oh yeah.
even more so.
Well, my phone is talking to me. My phone thinks I'm talking to it.
She thinks you're lonely.
I know. Oh, I can answer that question. Oh, thank you, but I didn't want you to, because you don't know about burnout. We are talking about it. Well, that's very interesting because, I have been doing obviously a lot of research, and I'm a little bit of a nerd. So those of you who ever seen my smiling face before, or watched or listened to the Career Coffee Chat podcast, or live show, know that I'm a bit of a. I like to study. I like to know, what's the why here, because
Mhm,
chances are whatever the why is will help you understand how to alter the future that you want, not
mhm,
just necessarily respond to stimuli. I mean, amoebas can respond to stimuli.
mhm.
We're very complex and advanced creatures. Not that amoebas are bad. I'm not knocking the amoebas. So let's not have an amoeba hate, group outside my window or something. I can see it now. These little dudes marching around with their little signs. I'm kidding.
It's amazing. Great visual.
She's like, "What? You can't even see those." Anyway, I digress. But I've been studying. What are some of the impacts of what we've been experiencing,
Mhm,
particularly when it comes to how we're feeling, how we're responding. And so when we first went into isolation in 2020, I was like, okay, what are the impacts of long term isolation? Because we have research. We've researched this. So, Lisa, you're smart and you probably know some of these answers. What do you think are the top things that took a big hit when a human being is isolated from other humans?
ooh. Well, I'm on the edge of my seat waiting for your response, but I'd say that the first thing that took a hit is our relationships, is our ability to be with other people. There's no denying that there is a biological energy that gets passed back and forth when we're in person. I mean, there's research on research that's done around body language and interaction and quantum physics
Mm-hmm.
in the interaction of two people. And actually, the Nagoski twins, who wrote the book Burnout, talk about this constantly, that a big contributor of burnout is not having sourcing relationships around you, not being able to be in person.
Right.
And so I keep going back to that. When people are burned out, well, how are your relationships? How are you getting poured into? Are you just being poured out? And for women, it's three times as bad as men because we're biologically hardwired to be givers, human givers instead of human beings, they call it in their book. So relationships are such a big part of the human experience, and that got massively impacted for those
Right.
who especially were not used to working virtual. I've been working virtual since 2014 when I
Mhm.
started my business, my coaching business. And the first 2 to 3 years were so hard for me because
It
I'm a
was hard.
natural
Yeah.
extrovert
Mhm.
and I was not getting my in-person fix. I would just be in my apartment day in and day out, and I would go to the gym in my building upstairs, and sometimes I wouldn't leave for days. And it was
Oh
just
gosh, how did you deal with that?
a lot of crying, a lot of support
Oh
from my
no.
coach and my team. And I was teaching at the time, but I was teaching virtually
Mhm.
most of the month, and then I would meet up in person to train the coach training program.
Mhm.
And eventually I fell into a rhythm of I'd go out for coffee every single day. I had at least one scheduled conversation on the calendar every
Oh
single
good.
week where I would go out of my apartment and meet someone new or a friend. Or then I had date nights. And so there were certain things that I eventually put into place, but luckily I had those structures solid by the time COVID came along, so that I
Mhm.
could then support others to do the same. But
Mhm.
man, 2020 was so challenging for
And a
so
lot of
many because
2021 as well, and we're still
and that
seeing
too,
some impacts of that. In fact,
for sure.
I will talk, and a lot of you probably know whether you're introverted or extroverted. Now, here's a myth. Oh, introverts don't need to be around people. That is absolutely not true.
Not
In
true.
fact, it is not true. So you mentioned relationships was the big thing that took the hit. Yes.
Hmm.
And then what does that do? So isolation is literally the inability to be around other human beings. And why is that important? Yes, because one, it doesn't trigger the same chemical release in the brain. So all the hormones that keep us happy, nope, not happening. And that's one reason why speaking in person is so awesome because, yeah, I mean, I love doing virtual speaking events. I do them all the time. Hey, this is one right here. However, it takes a lot more energy. And two, you don't get that same synergy, that the same chemicals aren't being released by your brain. It's very fundamental. Like, oh shoot, not dopamine because that's an addictive one. And that's what you get when you achieve things. But oxytocin, that's a big one. That's released like when you hug people.
Hmm. Hmm.
Lots of oxytocin. I mean, if you really want to get a big boost of happiness, just go hug somebody. Now, I don't recommend walking up to a random stranger and hugging them because right now they might freak out. Okay, but it is true. So those things aren't being released. So what does that do? Well, one of the biggest things that takes a hit with isolation, self-imposed or otherwise, is neuroplasticity. So that's our
Hmm.
ability to accept and form new ideas and concepts and ways of being. We become more fixed.
Hmm.
And that leads to enhanced tribalism. So that is basically a perspective by which we're not able, we become more narrowly focused on our on this perception or this preference of being or preference to see other people be a certain way. And you're seeing that. I mean, it was pre-pandemic, obviously, was happening a lot, but like political battles. I mean, I've seen people 50 years of friendship, because of just something simple. Another thing that took a big hit, emotional intelligence
Hmm.
declined. It'll decline between 25-30%. I would say probably a lot more than that, but I don't have
Hmm.
the research on that. But research says between 25 and 30%. So people are less likely to respond positively or with resilience or in a balanced way to stimuli. So you're seeing a lot of people as much more sensitive right now, right? So why? Why is that? Well, one, they're burned out, so they don't have the capacity for more. If that makes sense, and their ability to respond has been literally damaged. It's not permanent. It comes back, and just being aware of these things is really important when we're starting to get back together and we're starting to figure out what's the best path for us moving into the future. Just know we're coming out of a more disadvantaged position as a human being. So, yay! So
So,
that's one reason why it's important to be, get your bubble, get your friends, go out there, talk from a distance. I don't care. Talk to people, get around
mhm.
people, get outside, get sunshine, get exercise, get some nature therapy, get a hobby, Be active, because being in a enclosed space is literally damaging for you as human.
Literally. And I think that it's so easy for us to be creatures of habit.
Mm-hmm.
We don't understand that it takes a certain amount of effort and acceleration energy to get out of that habit too. So when we think about, oh, just go outside, just, hug a tree, hug a person, pick
Yeah,
up a new
just do that.
hobby,
Yeah.
our brains actually disconnect from the work that it takes in order to do that. And if
Mm-hmm.
we're not embracing that gradient of change, this
Mm-hmm.
idea that, hey, you have to go outside your comfort zone a little bit, you have to, you know, um, do a little bit of work to research the hobby, to then go take a class, to then et cetera, et cetera. If you're not aware that it takes just a little bit of effort to do that, then you will actually fall into the path of least resistance instead and just keep doing the same things that you're doing, which is why it is so important to have a coach, to have a spouse, to have a partner, to have someone challenging you and going, did you do that thing? Did you actually do that thing? What would be sufficient to your resistance in going out and doing that thing that's actually the thing that you want? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that coaching in general is such a powerful industry because it's been filling this niche that mentorship was just not cutting it.
Right.
And there's a huge gap in the marketplace around mentorship, around championing other people, around
Mm-hmm.
advocacy on a individual level. I mean, years and years ago, hundreds of years ago, things like mentorships and um, oh my gosh, what is it called? Apprenticeships.
Right.
Apprenticeships were a
Mm-hmm.
huge thing. We don't have those anymore. But human beings need that. We need that constant challenge outside of our comfort zone. Similar to neuroplasticity, our comfort zones are elastic. So we have to be able to continuously push outside of it in order for it to expand. Otherwise, it's going to contract and we're going to experience that sort of tribalism and limited
Mm-hmm.
thinking that keeps us self perpetuating um, our least desired results. It has us. That's typical self sabotage. Us staying in our comfort zone and not breaking out of that thing.
Right.
So, really important things. I was actually writing down some notes as you were talking because you're absolutely right. I mean, we don't get those same chemical hits that we do when we're in person, when we are challenging our thinking, when we're going outside our comfort zone and we're trying new things. It
Mm-hmm.
actually allows for more neural pathways to be developed for better creativity, for better cognitive thinking. And a lot of the work that I do um, is around emotional intelligence. And
Mm-hmm.
I use that language of emotional intelligence quite often that um, 90% of our success at any job is emotional intelligence. And then 10% is what we know. It's the intellect, or it's the technology, it's
Mm-hmm.
the experience that we've developed because of a particular software platform or whatever it is. And if we're not working on our emotional intelligence, we're losing it. It's just like a
Absolutely.
muscle. If we're not using it, we're losing it.
Yes, you're absolutely onto it. I mean, and in order to use it most effectively, I feel, and most dynamically, that interaction with other people, and it's not just any interaction.
Mm.
It's an
Mm.
intentional, interested interaction. It's a very big difference between just existing in the same space, virtually or in person, or being intentionally interested. And there's different reasons why it's important to make a distinction between the two. One is you are invested, so you are growing, and the other is you are better connecting to the other person because they can tell that you're interested. Big difference. Big difference.
If I may ask a question, how do you see that showing up in the workplace most often?
People are very disconnected right now. Almost like I shared when we opened the show, almost everybody I talk to, they're fried. Literally, people are just fried. I mean, disaster fatigue. We've got exhaustion from working way more than you should have, probably in 2020, because you had guilt, survivor guilt, if you currently had a job in 2020. And then you've got, the stress of change, being in an isolated situation, having to shift your way of working and living, literally. Then work is easily accessible inside your house at all times. So having boundaries takes it's some intentional effort. So people are just tired from that. They're tired of constant uncertainty, particularly if you tend to watch the news or listen to any sort of news or radio show or listen to anything like that that talks about world events. Chances are most of them are not rosy or telling you how wonderful it is. And that impacts us because we are a product of what we take in. So, how is that showing up in the workplace? Well, people are tired and they're disassociating. So what's happening is, let's just say they have a Teams meeting, because everybody's on Teams. So they have a Teams meeting, and most people don't even bother to show their face. Now, I get it. Why are we having a Teams meeting and not a conference call? And people are like, well, that's just what it is. But it's not. Because subconsciously, you can consciously say, okay, well, we're just having a Teams meeting. We're not showing our face. It's just like a conference call. No, it's not. Because you're still staring at a screen. It engages different parts of your brain. So if you were just having a conference call, you would be more attuned to tone of voice and that sort of thing, which you're hearing. So your senses would be very attuned to that. However, because you're staring at little bubbles, you're now shifting some of that energy away from that, but to no purpose. So there's nothing wrong with having a conference call, number one, if you're not going to show your face. And two, if you are going to I'll go through all the trouble to have one of those little, group sessions, they need to be facilitated much differently. And it needs, I could go on at length because it's very important to have these facilitated to teach people how to engage in the virtual environment. Because right now people are disengaged. And one of the reasons is multitasking. They're not interested in the conversation. Maybe they realize that I'm just here to listen. I'm here to talk. Well, that's pointless. You could have it transcripted. They can listen to it later. I mean, it's a big dynamic. And when I was doing culture changes inside of corporations, this was something I would address head on because it's the number one sore on everybody's backside. It really is.
I also think that meetings have replaced productivity insanely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have no words for it, but there it has been a massive increase in the amount of meetings that managers are in now, or that anybody is in now. And there's meetings about meetings. There's meetings about productivity instead of trusting workers to do their work and to support people on their own paths, on their own performance.
Right. A lot of
and so so in my line of work, I've been focusing a lot on what the individuals can do in order to set boundaries, in order to shift their own team cultures. A lot of my clients will manage small teams within organizations. So, my typical client will manage between 3 and 20 people. And when you're that size, you can still develop supportive relationships with your coworkers, and you can develop your own microculture within companies sufficient to having larger, fuller buckets of well-being. What I find interesting, and something that I haven't dived into to a deep extent, is shifting cultures in larger organizations. The organizations that are hundreds of thousands of people or thousands of people. I mean, that those are ships that take a long time to change. And what I've been what I've been witnessing and seeing is that there is a very, very fast moving change in our work culture, but these huge organizations they're either not changing, they refuse
No.
to change, or
Mm-mm.
they're like the Titanic. They're way too slow to change. And then they're
Mhm.
losing wonderful people. They're losing top
Absolutely.
talent
Mm-hmm.
because their focus is on profits instead of their people. And because their focus is on their profits and not their people, they're losing the good people that will help their profits and
Profits.
productivity.
Exactly.
So it's this
It's a vicious
unbelievably
cycle.
clear
Mm-hmm.
vicious cycle. And I think we were talking about this before the show. I mean, the data is obvious. The statistics are obvious. People are looking for
Yeah.
caring, empathetic, compassionate
Mm-hmm.
leaders. There has been article upon article in Forbes and Harvard Business Review about the new leadership model that's needed being an empathetic, compassionate, caring leadership model. That's what people crave. And that's what we need when we're burnt out. When we're burnt out, we can't do more work. We actually need more boundaries. We need more caring. We need someone
Mm-hmm.
to pipe up and say, hey, I got you. I see you. You're doing great work. What do you need right now?
Right.
We need more of that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, you know, it's, I am at a loss as to how to impact that change at a macro level, besides continuing to work with those who are open minded enough to say, hey, the buck stops here. I want to change this for me and my team.
Mm-hmm.
But kudos to people who are going into the Microsofts and the Googles and the Facebooks and the LinkedIns and going, hey, let's change some shit up, guys. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
That's
Dropped the
okay.
bomb.
That's okay. We're not that PC here. Yeah. So it's interesting. You brought up a good point. You're like, how do you change larger organizations? Because, and I would argue also to I'm not argue, but also share that we're seeing. Be, I'm backing up. I'm backing up. I'm giving you a why. That's what I do. I do that. So then I talk too much, but so
Just the right amount.
it's the right amount for this, but sometimes it can be much. So the why are we seeing? Well, one, yes, big corporations have a lot of processes. They're embedded, really. However, most of them in America, because they have not followed any sort of continuous improvement advice or Lean Six Sigma advice that I gave them at all, they're still very siloed. They're not work stream focused. They're siloed. So you can't actually affect change on one business unit. So just think of it like at a smaller. You're not trying to eat the whole elephant. You're just saying, okay, well, this business line we can impact change on. And then when the beautiful thing about that is when that business line starts seeing dramatic results and starts reporting out how awesome they're doing at the executive level, because that will happen,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with the consultant's encouragement. Then other executives are like, oh, I don't look so good. Maybe I need to see what they're doing over there if they're smart. And hopefully they are at that level. So that's one way to do it. But I will also say that even with smaller organizations, we're seeing a reluctance to change. And sometimes what I call the rubber band effect, people are snapping back to the way it used to be
Mm-hmm.
because their capacity for change is, they don't have it. They literally don't have it. So our human physical being is not built, and our brains aren't built to handle this much stress for this long.
Mm-hmm.
We're built to run away from the saber-tooth tiger, fight or flight, short-term stress. Great, we got that. However, if it's prolonged, we just simply don't have the tools to handle it. So what we're seeing right now, and that's a main contributor to burnout, is because it's not just at the professional level, it's life, it's holistically, like everything is different. And there's too much. It's just too much. So the response to that is, I'm not doing anything. People are checking out. They're disconnecting. They
Mm-hmm.
don't want, they can't accept more. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what do we do with that? That's really the question. That's $1 million question. Okay, so we know our cup is full and we can't add any more in. So what do we do?
Yeah. And what you're speaking to is also a traumatizing effect. It's what
Mm-hmm.
happens when people experience trauma. It's too much, too fast, too soon, or for too long. Those are the four different markers of trauma being created. And trauma isn't an event, it's how we react to the event that then reprograms our neural pathways to then respond in a stressed way to a particular thing, and then it stays
Right.
that way. That groove gets even deeper and deeper. And it's not what we're experiencing isn't just burnout, it is trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that most companies are also not built to understand or handle trauma within their
No.
workforce, because we've never experienced this before. We've never experienced this much stress and this much prolonged stress on a macro culture level,
Mm-hmm.
at least in my lifetime. Certainly before this, I'm sure. But I think that companies need to not only develop that awareness of what's happening, of what's causing burnout, but they also need to develop some tools and benefits to support their people during that.
Right.
And um, yeah, again, there's so much information out there on what you can do, but I think companies need to stop looking at this at a individual worker problem level,
Mm-hmm.
and need to look at this as a cultural change issue.
Mm-hmm. It's systemic. It's even beyond culture. It's global. I mean,
Yeah,
it's as a race, our lives will never be the same. Full stop.
yeah, 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 that's true. And being able to offer things like coaching, like,
Mm-hmm.
more flexible days off, more time to do your work, more ability to connect with your coworkers instead of just, you know, heads down, more performance, more performance, more performance.
Right.
There has to be an interruption to the hustle culture as part of the problem, and there has to be a lot more support around the benefits for for individual workers within larger organizations, not as a replacement for them then doing more,
Right.
but as a new foundation for our performance.
Yeah. And leaders, I'll be very honest in saying that while executive coaching has predominantly been withheld to the executive ranks, it's the worst thing they could do. And I'm not saying
Mm,
executives don't need coaching. What I
mhm.
am saying is they're ignoring the leadership ranks who are most directly and immediately impactful to their bottom line,
Yes.
if they want to look at
Yes.
it like that, because it's your middle managers, it's your first line supervisors, and those are the ones that need the coaching. What they do, if you're lucky, is they get a training session. Well, we know that no one gets significantly better or see any significant change from a coach or from a training or a workshop. That just doesn't happen if they even
Mhm.
get that. But most of them don't even get that. They
Yeah.
just really don't get anything. I mean, oh, you're a great individual performer. Here you go. Um, so they lose a great individual contributor and gain a bad manager. Not always, to be fair, but that does happen quite often. And these people are floundering. They're overwhelmed because
Mhm.
they get everything. They get it from the top. Do more, or we're not performing, whatever. And then they're dealing with massive attrition. They're dealing with people. Oftentimes, these individual contributors don't have people training. That's what you're doing. You're a leader
Yep.
now. You need to be an
Yep.
expert in people. Don't
Yep.
get into people training.
Yeah.
So it's a big struggle. And oh, by the way, now you also have to be a trauma therapist,
Mhm.
and you have to
Mhm.
completely reinvent your way of thinking what leadership is. And it's a lot for people to consume. So having some guidance is really non-negotiable. If you want to be successful, it's not non-negotiable. And there's tons of tools and guidance out there, but it's so important to give these individual coaching so they will know how to navigate compounding change, how to deal with the fact that their cups are, you know, running over. I mean, they just can't handle it. They don't have capacity for more. So what do we
Mhm.
do? Typically, as humans, we tend to complicate things.
Mhm.
We just add on more. I have a great idea. So if you're wanting to achieve big things about the big burnout, create a stop doing list.
Mm-hmm.
That's my number one tip for you. Don't have a to-do list. Have a to-don't. Have a to-don't list. How about that? That is really important. Forget the to-do list. Have a to-don't list because we do a lot of things that aren't adding value to our life.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
What
call that
is?
a boundaries list.
Yeah. What's your boundaries list? And Lisa, what do
Yeah.
you think? What else? What else?
Well, I think that, especially nowadays, to live big with burnout, we have to put our boundaries in first. Before we do anything, before we start our week, before we open up our email, we have to put our boundaries in. When am I taking breaks? When am I having blackout time in my calendar? When am I stopping work? What reminders do I have to put into place? And also, what's most important to us? So, on your stop doing list, we also have to prune back what we are and are not doing. Instead of
Right.
the more and more and more, I can just add this little thing. It's faster for me to do it instead of delegating it. That's such like pre-COVID 2020. Like we have to stop adding things on, and we have to set boundaries and go, okay, what's the one most important thing I have to get done today? Eat the frog, so to speak. The one most important thing to get done today or
I love
this week.
this.
Post-it notes. I have post-it notes all over the place
Only
too.
3 items. I did an
Mm-hmm.
actual dynamic study on this. Now, those of you who are Lean Six Sigma black belts and know what I'm talking about when I say dynamic study, it's a statistical analysis of actual time, like
Mm-hmm.
how much significant things. Now, that's the only subjective item that's significant. How many significant things do you get completed in a day?
Mm-hmm.
Answer 3. To now, probably 2. And that, being okay with that, high achievers.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a high achiever. Being okay with that. You're not a failure because you got 2 things done off your list. Don't add more. That's it. That's all you're going to do. Now, are you playing a game? Well, maybe, but you're also setting boundaries.
Yes. We also need to identify who is helping us. Everyone needs support. Everyone. And back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show, that sort of support and knowing someone's there for you
Mm-hmm.
adds energy back to you throughout the day. It has you feel like you belong. It has you feel like you're valued. It has you feel like someone's got your back. And so having a teammate, having a spouse, having a friend, having a coach, having a therapist, like whoever it is who has your back and can support you and say, what do you need? Is so, so, so valuable. So make sure that you're also getting poured into just as much as you're pouring out, especially if you're in management or leadership and you're handling so many other things. I can't tell you how common it is, especially for women leaders, to be under supported.
Oh,
And it's so uncomfortable for us to get more support and
right.
more support
We
and
feel
more
like we
support.
should have all the answers. We're the nurturers. We give.
Yeah.
And I would, for any of you out there that identify with being a woman leader, when's the last time you took something for you or did something for you? When was the last
Yeah.
time you gave to yourself?
Mm-hmm.
I'd
Mm-hmm.
love to hear that, whether you're watching now or listening to the replay.
Yeah. And then the third most important thing, I think, besides boundaries and partnership, is raising the floor. So
Mm,
when our ceilings get higher and our performance gets higher and our need to pour out or be with or we're stressed out, like whatever that reason that our ceiling gets higher, we have to strengthen our floors even more. That's
mm,
often what gets pushed back to the back burner. And this isn't about more stuff. This is about prioritization. It's
mhm.
about stronger foundations. It's about stronger sense of self. And even just looking at your relationship to self-care and self-love, even just by looking at it, our brains are yes machines. If we feed it something like, hey, how can I take care of myself better today? Your brain will automatically go to work doing that just by asking that question. So even just looking at our relationship to self-care and self-love and foundations will actually bolster our own ability to keep going, to actually put those things in place. And if
Right.
you write those things down, like, hey, I'm going to take 3 10-minute breaks today, or 3 15-minute breaks today, and I'm going to go for a walk once. If you write it down, you're 3 times more likely to do it. If you schedule it in your calendar, you're 5 times more likely to do it. So there's little tips and tricks that you can use in order to support yourself, even just micro gradients, like the power of 1 degree turns. It can't be overstated.
So tremendous. I mean, I wrote a whole book about, small significant shifts that have a tremendous impact. We don't have to reinvent who we are as people to see real results. I mean, you'd be amazed at how, mentioned, pausing. I call them the power pause. Brain breaks is another one of my favorite terms for that. And it's absolutely critical, by the way, if you do want to achieve peak performance without burnout, is taking those power pauses throughout the day and unplugging. No email, no watching, YouTube, no Facebooking, no scrolling. Put the phone away. Do something that's a repetitive, non-cognitive function task. So you're getting off your task positive neural network and letting it refresh, because your brain uses glycogen, and it can't just magically produce that. It has to have time to refresh, just like any muscle in your body. If you're using it, it gets tired. Same thing with your brain. So it needs to refresh those glycogen stores so it continue to think. So if you want to continue to think, well, you have to break. That's kind of necessary. So, and the other one you mentioned, which was beautiful, was, often misunderstood. Now I'm having a frog in my throat. Often misunderstood is self-love. I love to hear from people who feel comfortable with the idea that they're worthy of loving themselves. We're not taught to do that.
Not at all. Not in our culture, not as women, not in modern day society. No. And instead, we slap on fixes to self-love instead. We think that getting a massage or the amount of time we spend in a spa, it replaces self-love. Not at all. You don't need anything in order to practice that. It's our relationship to ourselves. It's that we're worthy. It's that we're valuable. It's that, you can look into someone else's eyes and know they have innate value without them doing, saying, or behaving any particular way. And we don't attribute value to that on a natural basis. I could go on and on about self-love, but that has been such a major part of my transformative journey, starting 10 years ago until now. I was never taught how to love myself, but I was taught how to achieve and how to perform. And that was supposed to get me love.
That's right. That's what we were taught. If you get straight A's, you'll get a whatever, right? You'll get a toy, or you'll, be able to go on that vacation you want, or be able to go, as you get older on the girlfriend trip or whatever. It's about achievement, and then you get it's goal. It's goal achievement. It's all it is. We're not taught that it's okay to, without judgment, without reserve, unconditionally have a high positive self-regard. And that's not bad. It's not, we see it as a bad thing. Oh, well, that's, being egotistical. No, it has nothing to do with it. It just, okay, let's put it like this. Are you your own best friend? Just think about that. Just being your own best friend. Do you talk to yourself in your head like you would to a best friend? Do you judge yourself like you would your best friend? Would you care about yourself like you would your best friend? Most people don't, because they're not taught to do that. Now, I will say the wonderful thing I am seeing is in the generations that are coming up, your younger generations, we're seeing more openness to that. But I know in my generation, when it's before me, by the way, I'm an Xer. Nobody talks about us. We don't exist. Yeah, who's that? An X? What? Yeah. Anyway. But yeah, we're not taught to do that. We're taught to achieve, and you get a reward.
Yeah, and just the opposite is a problem too. Taught that anything you do is perfect and should be fawned over and validated. I think that's just it's just the opposite end of this pendulum swing.
Yeah, it is.
It's not this idea that whatever you do or don't do, you should be applauded. It's that you are loved no matter what. And you can still go out and do these things that are representative of your value. It's, I want to build a coaching business because I love myself, not I will love myself when I build a coaching business.
Right. Or I will, like, just we put limits on how much happiness, success, and achievement we can accept in our lives. We were talking right before the show about this book by Gay Hendricks called The Big Leap. And he hypothesizes that we all have an upper limit switch, that we can only accept so much, love, happiness, success, prosperity, etc. We all have an idea of what we should have or experience. And when we get to that limit, we will self-sabotage. So I tested it. I read the book. I was like, I don't know about this. So I tested it. And sure enough, one of the things I noticed is anytime I thought, now this is history, thank goodness, but anytime I thought that, wow, my husband and I are getting along really well, I would self-sabotage it. I would. It'd be something picky. He would say something like, what do you mean by that? I'd just have this big argument. It was so silly. And then halfway through, I'd be like, oh, I'm doing the thing. But we do. We have a limit. And like you mentioned before, when we raise the ceiling, can we raise the floor? Can we create the set foundation for ourselves? Can we challenge our limits, how much we can accept in our life, and let that be okay? Yeah, and you mentioned comfort zone too, which I really appreciate that. Your capacity for growth is only as big as that comfort zone, if you will. Well, there's different ways to look at a comfort zone. I'm a big proponent for zone of genius, so living and thriving in your zone of genius, and not attempting to be someone you're not. Because some people, when they see that, I need to get outside my comfort zone, means I need to be, I'm introverted, but let me be extroverted. And that's not exactly what we're talking about. What are your thoughts, Lisa?
Well, it's important to set an intention, to set a purpose that aligns with yourself first before you do any of that stuff. It's not just, I'm introverted, so I have to be extroverted, or I normally don't do this thing, so I need to do this thing. It has nothing to do with that. It's more the exercise of it. And it's also where we're going too. It's, okay, is this going in a direction where I want to be going? Do I want to be more extroverted? Or do I want to be going to more conferences? Do I want to be networking better? Right. I'm working with a client now who he wants to change his careers, and he's a high-level consultant. And one of the things that he hired me for was to get over his fear of networking, which was hysterical because he comes off as such a charming, engaging, relationship-forward person. And as soon as I reflected that, he was like, well, I am, but when it comes to networking, I just can't do networking. So I'm like, well, what's the difference? What's the difference for you? What if it was all relationship building and all enjoying someone's company? What if that was the direction you go in? And that was the whole purpose in networking, was enjoying more people's company, but doing it in such a way that you have a couple of questions that you ask in those conversations, or you have a couple of bullet points that you want to make sure that you include. That's all that networking is.
Right. It's just having a conversation and meeting people.
Yeah. And if that was his exercise in expanding his comfort zone, then that creates so much more meaning for him. And it has created so much more meaning for him. Oh, he's like the networking king now. It's amazing. But I think it's so important for us to define success based on our own terms first, and then create that path. And in emotional intelligence, a huge component to success and happiness in your job and anyone's job is self-actualization. And self-actualization actually acts as a muscle. It acts as a skill that you can build. And there's ways to do this. I think one of them is what I just mentioned. Identify what your success point is. What is success for me? And a lot of overachievers will rail against this. Well, success is, more profit, more clients, more promotions, more money, whatever. No, it's not. What is meaningful to you beyond that? If you get this, then what? Then what? Then what?
Right. I like backing people into it. And this throws them a little bit. It's like, okay, pretend you're at the fruition of your life. and you're looking back over your life, what do you want to say you've accomplished? What do you want to achieve? What do you want to feel great about? What is it? And typically, it's not working longer, how much money they made. It's not. It comes back completely differently. Like, oh my gosh, it has nothing to do with my career. It's like, that's right. Oftentimes, our careers exist to facilitate these things in our life that we want to experience.
Mm-hmm.
It is
Mm-hmm.
not the end all be all, and that's one reason why, up until perhaps the up and coming generations, prior generations, baby boomers, for example, there's been some research, when someone retires, the first 5 years, they have a 75% increased risk of passing away, like death.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is the stress from just their self-identification completely. Like they don't they don't know who they are because of identifying with work. So
Right.
if you want to live big without the big burnout, who are you? And maybe taking time, and I know we see a lot of people taking that time because they had that time in 2020, whether they liked it or not.
Yep.
And it was, when they weren't commuting, to go, I'm not sure I like what I'm doing here, but they're not quite sure what to do about it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the stress we're seeing, and people, just bouncing out of their current position. Well, are you taking the baggage from that position to your next position?
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, yes.
We are the common denominator of our problems.
That's right.
But we don't want to hear it, though. We want to hear that it's an easy fix. If we just leave this thing, we'll be better for it.
That's right. It's all the company's
Happens.
fault. Yeah.
All the company's fault. It's all my manager's fault. It's my husband's fault. It's my dog's fault. Whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Taking responsibility is not easy, but it makes the biggest difference. And I think taking time to identify what those blocks are for you, taking responsibility, and then what success means, what happiness means, what meaning means to you. And it's not that we have to have those answers, but just by looking for those answers, we're able to find more and more and more meaning. So just by looking for, okay, what's the meaning to this? What's most important here? You're actually increasing your skill of self-actualization, because it's not the knowing exactly what's important in everything that you do. It's the looking for it.
I have
That's most
great, and this is here for me, overachiever, to remember.
That's a great reminder.
It sits right there. I don't need to know all the details to be a massive success. And last week, actually, before one of my conferences, I shared, practicing the art of not knowing. And one of my former clients is like, I want to know more about that. So this week, I promised that I would share more about that. So if you're interested, check out some of my posts, because I'll be sharing the art of not knowing and what it means and how it can be very freeing, because we've been trained since from a very young age to have the answers. And I think that also is a source of some stress, because so much is uncertain right now, and if we have to have all the answers, everything else is uncertain. So it's just like this all the time. It's not adding up. So that's a low level, I call a steady state low level stress, that's adding to the cup that we're just not able to manage. You don't have control over much, but you do have control over you. So if you can practice the art of, like, do I need to know the answer of this? Not.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's born out of fear, because we feel like the more we know, the more you can be prepared.
The more we can try to control things that are outside of our control anyways. And I think being able to put that to bed, to meet those voices in our head. I'm a big proponent of parts work, of those who combine coaching and therapy. And in therapy, there's a subset called internal family systems, which is essentially parts work. You take a look at the different parts of yourself that are causing stress in that particular situation, and you have a conversation with it. Okay, what's the part of me that needs to control, that's really scared right now, that can't handle change? Oh, she's 12 years old again, and she just moved towns, and she's about to join a different soccer team. Like, she's really scared of change. What does she need? She needs to know that she's safe. She needs to know that she's got the skills. She needs to know that adult Lisa's got her taken care of, for instance. And when we address those parts of ourselves, we then reduce the volume of stress because that part is no longer generating the stress in our subconscious saying,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know, we have to know. And instead, if we're able to, get our needs met, and I love the art of not knowing. If we're able to be curious instead, curious, interested, if we're able to look at, you know, what if this could be a learning experience? What can I learn here? How can I grow here? Again, just by asking that question, you can be successful in that situation. I told you before we hopped on that I'm 6 months pregnant now, and this is my first child. I had no idea what I was doing. This was not an easy process for me
No.
and my husband by any stretch of the means. It took
Right.
about 2.5 years to get to where we are now. And I really faced my need to know
Mm-hmm.
so many times. So many times. I wanted to know that there was a guarantee that things were going to work out, that I had some semblance of control.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the art of surrender is another thing. Surrender is not easy. Not knowing, letting go of what we can't control, and then
Mm-hmm.
looking at what we can, which is basically our actions and our attitude. Those are the only two things that we can control.
Right.
It's an art form, especially
It
for
is.
people who are used to performing at a high level, and
And
even
planning
small
and
actions.
having the plan of a 3 to 5, which is actually really unproductive, by the way. Living your life in increments of 3 to 5 years is not the way forward. I always recommend to have that true north, and it doesn't have to be, oh my gosh, I have to do this thing, and can never change. That's not the point. Like you have a upcoming completely life altering, beautiful change getting ready to happen, and your life will never be the same. It'll be wonderful after this, sleeping, pooping, crying stage. But
Which ends at about 16 years old.
yeah, well, it's debatable. You're a coach, you got this. But
Yeah.
I mean, our lives changes, so being agile to that change is really important.
Mhm.
And just having that true north is very helpful to get us through those times when the 3 to 5 year plan isn't working because we have no idea. And I'm not sure if I attach the words "the art of not knowing." It sounds cool. I like the words you use, surrender.
Mhm.
And that's super uncomfortable to a lot of people. When you hear the word surrender, most people are like, "What? I'm a high
Giving up.
achiever. I'm not surrendering. We're going, it's this thing, and that's not a comfortable word. So I'm still working on what the right word is. And if you're listening to this, or later, I'd love to hear from you what you think the right word is. The art of not knowing is pretty cool, but it is being able to find peace and balance in a world that is going through massive change. So we could keep talking at some length, and I know that we're running way near the end of our time together. It's been such a pleasure talking with you, Lisa. It's been such a
Same here.
pleasure sharing ideas and collaborating on how to live big without big burnout. We have tons, obviously, of ideas, but when it comes right down to it, and let me know, Lisa, what you think, it's really not about complexity. You're living big without the big burnout. It's truly about simplifying the life. It's about being able to let things go, and free yourself in the process. And you mentioned that you started your journey a couple of years ago, as far as self love and self respect or positive self regard. I started mine. I was a late bloomer. I started mine in my 30s as well. And I think there's something about the adult learning model where we become more self-authoring in our 30s. So that's
Mhm.
kind of that time where the mid-career crisis happens, or catalyst or change. And
Mhm.
oftentimes we start questioning, who am I really? Um, but yeah, up until that point, I was pretty convinced at some level that I wasn't worthy of anything. And of course that reflected in all my relationships and in my career. I mean, everything. I didn't receive what I wanted because I didn't think I was worthy of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, my friends, be careful of what you believe and what labels you put on yourself.
Our words and our thoughts create our reality. And I agree with you. I think it's about simplifying things, not complicating things.
Yes.
And self-love, I think, is the bottom. It's the punchline to a lot of this, especially for women. And self-love isn't about doing more. It's not. It's about being differently with ourselves. And that is a journey over time. We have to have patience for it.
Right. Exactly. And it's been fun having this journey today with you, Lisa. Thank you so much for tuning
Same
in.
here. It's been wonderful. Thanks for sharing
Yay.
an
Thank you
hour of
for
your
being here.
time.
That's been wonderful. And for those of you either watching now or later, it's been a pleasure to talk to you and be with you today. And if you're watching the replay, feel free to reach out. We're here to answer any questions you do have. And until next time, my friends, keep elevating. Bye for now.
Bye.